Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We've got a nice and cozy crowd today to listen to us, so thank you. Our session is on election campaigning. Do polls influence elections? And our panelists are Leo LaRosa, Florence Mayer, Werner Patzelt, and we're going to have some interesting presentations on the polls. And some of the I'm not an expert on polls, so I'm not going to proceed with giving an opinion on whether they make an impact and who does them and how transparent they are. But I think some of the questions we would want our panelists to probably answer in the polls are, who ultimately benefits from the polls? How have polls changed over the years? How transparent are polls? What are the factors that influence these opinion polls that are shown in print and TV media? Do politicians and political parties respect polls, or do they respect them only when they're favorable to them? And how are polls being impacted or influenced by the advent of social media, in this digital age? And another interesting one, perhaps for the audience, will be, because it's a mixed and diverse group from Asia and Europe, is how similar are polls in both regions, and what are the differences between the polls in both regions? So let me not delay any further and introduce the first speaker, Mr. Florence Mayer from Germany. Florence Mayer is a political researcher and consultant. He studied political studies, public law, modern history at the University of Gießen, Germany, and also the University of Leicester, UK. During his studies, he held a scholarship from the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. We love Cass, of course. He holds a PhD from the University of Münster, Germany. In 2012, he started working for the German Opinion Research Institute, DMAP, and in 2014, he represented the institute in Berlin and works together with political parties, government, institutions, and foundations. Since 1996, a DMAP joint venture, Infratest DMAP, has been the exclusive partner of the premier public television broadcaster in Germany, ARD, for public opinion research, exit polls, and election night coverage. So over to you, sir. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody, to this cozy crowd. We're going to have a nice discussion about political opinion polls and about the question if they affect voter behavior, and if so, how should we respond to that? First, let's start by saying, and it won't be a surprise to you, that I myself, working for an opinion research institute, I'm a big fan of opinion research, of course, because I think opinion research and all the studies, all the polls are of great essential value to everybody, to the public as well as to political parties. Because with the help of opinion polls, we are able to answer all these questions, for example. I don't need to read them out loud, it's just an example of the questions we ask at DMAP, at the information we deliver to the public, to the media, to political parties. And to give you one example, every month we ask the Germans in a representative study what the Germans think about their Chancellor, Angela Merkel. And as you can see, even after more than a decade in charge, Merkel still enjoys a solid majority of support. And by the way, this is one of the reasons, or maybe the main reason, why the Christian Democratic Union can be quite optimistic in this current election. Now, who benefits from all this information? Of course, political parties and political candidates, They are our purchaser, they are our clients, and they use these polls in order to plan and also to run their political campaign. They gather information about what people think about them and about what people think about their opponent. But usually the information we gather for them stays within, let's say, something like an inner circle of the party. So the public has no access to it. And also we do a lot of work for governments in Germany, the federal government, but also regional governments. And again, usually the information remains within the government and the public has no access. I myself think that polls should not be just a tool for those who govern. Opinion research should be accessible to everyone who's interested in it. And that's where the media becomes important. And it's good that in Germany that's actually working quite well. The media is even a bigger purchaser than the political parties because they have way more money to spend than political parties. At least that's how it is in Germany. And you can have a look at this slide. Those are, let's call them the 5 big political opinion research institutes in Germany. Each one of them works together with a media partner, print or television, and all the other media also uses that information that is published in the media. So honestly, it's working quite well. In Germany, everybody has access to the opinion polls, and I think in a democratic system, this is a good thing. It's a matter of transparency, actually. However, if, we are 3 weeks from the federal election, and now we have polls out there every day, almost every day, so one might even say that Germans right now are exposed to that kind of information. They cannot get rid of, they cannot get away from it. So, and that leads us to the question, do political opinion polls affect voter behavior, voter turnout? Research knows about two types of effects, of possible effects, the effects on voter behavior and effects on voter turnout. Behavior, sure, that is to say, for what party are people going to vote, and effects on turnout, are they going to vote at all? Now, research knows about a lot of experiments and studies, and I won't get into that. They all try to prove the existence of these effects. I won't do that. For me, it's enough to raise the question if these effects are plausible. Because I believe if these effects are plausible, that's already reason enough to take them into account into any electoral campaign. Now let's have a look at one of them. The first one, Bandwagon Effect, surely the most famous one, the most discussed one in all the papers. It's easy to explain. Bandwagon, sure, the wagon where the music plays on. People want to be where the music is, so they follow the band. And that is to say, in this case here, voters are likely to support the party that is currently leading in the polls, especially undecided voters. Why is it so? There are two reasons. One, also quite easy, people want to be among the winners, plain and simple. It just makes them feel good about themselves. And another reason, also especially for undecided voters, they see the polls and they think like, if so many people support party A, they cannot all be wrong. They must have a reason for that. So I better join their view as well and join supporting that party. Now, the plausibility, that's the goal to answer. Is it plausible that something like this exists? And I want to talk about this slide here. Let's have a look at it step by step. The red line stands for the support for the Social Democrats in Germany. The red line above for the support on the federal level, and the red line below the two for the support on regional levels in the states. Now, as you can see, the moment Martin Schulz, the former president of the European Parliament, now the head of the Social Democrats in Germany, announced that he would run for the Chancellor's office on the ticket of the Social Democrats, the SPD, the Social Democrats, experienced a major increase in support in our polls. They jumped from 20% up to 28%, later up to 32%. That was like an historic development for the party. But I argue that in this case, Martin Schulz was something like the bandwagon, because he also affected the polls on other levels. It was not only the federal level where you can actually vote for Martin Schulz on the 24th of September. No, he also affected the polls on the regional levels, and the support for the SPD went up just as much. As you can also see, just for a matter of time, only for 2 months, then this support kind of vanished and everything went back to normal. Of course, there are many reasons for what we see here, for the increase and the decrease of the support. And of course, I'm not claiming that the bandwagon effect is something like is the only reason. I'm not even claiming that it's the strongest reason. I'm just saying it's plausible, might be that it's one of the reasons for this support for the Social Democrats in this time. Later on, we can discuss more about that issue if you want. Now, the Underdog Effect, also quite easy to explain. Underdog Effect says that voters are likely to support the party that is currently losing in the polls. And why is that? Also, 2 reasons are discussed in the literature. Some scholars even say that people feel sorry for the losing party, and that's why they vote for the party. Well, there's also a tactical one. I think it's more interesting. As you might know, in Germany, a party needs at least 5% to enter parliament. And so it can be that one of the reasons to support a losing party is to actually make sure that this party gets that 5% so it can enter parliament. And this is exactly what happened 4 years ago in one state in Germany, in Lower Saxony. And as you can see, our underdog in this scenario are the liberals. The yellow line shows the support for the liberals in the polls and then in the final result. And as you can see, over a long period of time, it showed that the liberals were about to fail to get 5%, and they were not able to enter parliament. However, the conservatives, the CDU in Lower Saxony, they wanted to form a coalition with the liberals, so they needed them in the parliament. So what happened, quite obviously, some of the supporters of the CDU, of the conservatives, they did not actually vote for the CDU, but they voted for the liberals in order to make sure they enter parliament, and so the liberals ended up jumping from 5% up to 10%, and therefore, I believe, proving the plausibility of this underdog effect. Now, so much for the effects on voter behavior. Now let's discuss effects on voter turnout. I list 3 examples, 3 effects. I'm going to talk about one of them, just briefly about maybe the lethargy effect and the resignation effect. Currently, as I showed you earlier, maybe let's go back to one slide. As you can see here, the Christian Union, the Conservatives, are currently far ahead in the election, in the polls. So that's why the CDU right now, they fear, everybody who's working there, they fear, of course, lethargy effect, because they fear that their supporters might just say, well, my party is going to win anyway, so they don't need my vote on the election day. They're so far ahead, they don't need me. And if 2 people say that, that's not an issue. If 3 people say that and do that, that's not an issue. But if 200 or 300,000 people say that, that could be a problem for the CDU. For the same reason, Labour Party, the Social Democrats fear the resignation effect. They are far behind in the CDU in the current polls. So they fear that some of their supporters might say, well, why bother? We gonna lose anyway. Martin Schulz won't be chancellor, so why bother going to the poll office? Now, I want to talk about the closeness effect, or also called the mobilization effect. It actually says when 2 or more parties are close to each other in polls, voter turnout will increase, and that's also easy to explain. 2 parties are close to each other. That says they're equally likely to fail as to win. Therefore, it's quite easy for the party to support, to mobilize and motivate their supporters. And then it is also what happened, as we can see here, in one regional election in a very, very small state in Germany at the beginning of this year. It's called the Saarland. And as you can see, only 10 days before the election day, the CDU and the Social Democrats, here the black and red graph, were really close to each other. And one could not tell who would actually win and who would be able to form a government. And so it was very close, and that had, as you can see, actually an effect on voter turnout. Turnout increased by 8% in comparison to 2012, and let me tell you that is quite a jump. It's almost historic that actually voter turnout gets up by 8%. That's a lot. And we also see who could benefit from that effect. And it was the CDU, and they could benefit from that. There are many reasons for that, why they could actually benefit from that. And of course, one of the reasons is that they had a very, very successful and effective Get Out the Vote campaign in the last weeks before Election Day. And Mario was telling us a lot about the tools that the CDU used, the house door canvassing tool, and as you can see, it was quite successful. They could benefit from this big voter turnout. Now, I think I've, from my point of view, shown you that these effects are indeed plausible, and therefore I think it's essential to ask what should be the consequences. The consequences for the media, I believe, should be that they should care or deal carefully and responsibly with our opinion polls that we publish, that we deliver to them. I think the most important issue should be that they shall make sure that everybody understands that our polls are not predictions. Because 10 days, 20 days, 30 days before the election day, of course, we cannot predict the final result. How could we? It's just a snapshot. It's just the political atmosphere in the moment of the poll. No more, but also no less. So if people understand that, then maybe the effects will be smaller. And another thing that I think is important, that journalists should not only focus on the so-called horse race journalism, who is leading in the polls, who might be the winner, who will be the chancellor. Our polls usually, we offer so much more. And so there's way more, many other stories to tell about the results of our polls. Also some arguments why a party is currently leading in the polls. So why not focus on that? And then last but not least, we talked about that on this conference a lot already, so I just mention it briefly. These effects are plausible, and that's why Get Out the Vote campaigns are essential for any campaign. There are the tools, we already introduced them, Mario introduced some of the tools to you, and they're proven to they work, obviously. So there's target mails, target canvassing. There are many tools to approach your target group, and parties should do that in order to maybe benefit from the closeness effect, or in order to prevent something like the lethargy or the resignation effect to happen. And that's about that. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Florence, for that insightful presentation. Our next speaker is Leo La Rosa from Philippines. A little bit about him. So Leo is the Director of Communications and Information Technology of Social Weather Stations, a private, non-profit scientific institute which conducts social surveys and does social science-based research and other educational activities to promote the quality of life of Filipino people, good governance and democracy. He has over 20 years of experience in social survey research, giving training on survey implementation, management, reporting, and findings on quality of life, good governance, public safety, democracy, and elections in general. He studied communication research at the University of Philippines and is currently working towards a master's degree at the same university. And he is also an SWS fellow since 2009. So the floor is yours. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for being here. I would like to thank KAS for the invitation and for the opportunity to be part of this timely conference. I'll be sharing insights from the Philippines with focus on the opinions of the voters themselves. And do polls influence elections? The easy answer can be I have 2 slides that can answer that, but the quick answer is a minimal yes. Directly. Indirectly, yes. So I'll also be sharing insights just so we can understand what's the context of election survey as an integral part of the election process in the Philippines. So, Aztec has given a few background about our organization. We do regular nationwide surveys, at least 4 times a year. We are self-sustained and we are politically nonpartisan. What makes us slightly unique from others is that we have a library that archives all the results of our surveys, and they are all open to the public for research, with a temporarily embargo of a maximum of 3 years, just so we can give premium to our subscribers. So that's how we support ourselves. We work like a newspaper for those who are interested in riding in our quarterly surveys, just like a bus, if Florence mentioned it. You pay for the seats. So that's how we sustain ourselves. So let me just share you something that happens in the Philippines. A short survey, can anyone guess here in this room what happens? What's the first thing that Filipinos hear over the radio and TV when they wake up September 1? Any guess? It's Christmas carols. Christmas. And I just stumbled upon this realization that it's not just in the Philippines where we have, in my impression, has the longest celebration of Christmas, but also the election season. Here, election season is like giving the starting gun for the horse race, and it starts as early, at least 1.5 years. 1.5 years before election day itself. This is made public. the practice of survey research in the Philippines, thanks to the revival of democracy 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago, has made public opinion polling a very active activity in the Philippines. And here, just so you would see, this is our current president, more than a year before elections. We asked the people, without queuing, without any choices, who do you think is the best leader that will succeed the previous president? No list, no queuing, no prompting, and they're allowed to give three answers. And here, for a local leader, he started out with 5%. And this is a senator. This is the incumbent vice president. And this is another senator. So all nationally elected leaders, and then one, the mayor at that time. So here we see how the career of our current president grew through this horse race. This is where the public starts, their minds are now tuned into the election because it's a signal the horse race has begun. So why conduct election surveys? Because it's information. It's a source of relevant, credible political information. And it generates interest in the campaigns and clarifies what are the choices for the voters. And of course, it provides information on the voting behavior and ultimately the quality of the election process. We're not just asking about the horse race. We're also asking, what are your plans? Are you going to go out there and vote? Are you planning to prepare for the elections by bringing your own list and things like that? So the study of the election process is a very detailed one. So what do Filipinos think about election surveys? More than half say polling organizations. There are many of us are right most of the time. That's a pretty good score, if I may say so. We have 30 years in the working to gain that kind of credibility. And 65% say election surveys are good for the country. And 43%, a bigger minority, would say that election survey news clarify rather than confuse their feelings as to who will win. So it's a useful source of information. And here, just to show you, we are not immune with fake news. There are also fake surveys. So just in the spirit of this conference where we deal with fakes, surveys are also widely faked in the Philippines come election season. But just like Florence mentioned, the real action and the real influence or the real effect happens in the politician side. The political strategist, the campaign strategist, with the start of the horse race, they can now plan their resources, they can plan their messages, they can rally their campaigns in areas where they're needed. So the real action happens here. But also for media, content. Election results is a timely content. It provides current and newsworthy data. It's an instrument for precision journalism, and it provides information that's easy for the public to understand. And of course, why do we do election surveys? It's not something just because we feel like, it's good for the revenue, but it's also to promote the practice of survey research. We all know that a population is the only way to accredit or to validate a sample. The population will always be superior to the sample, and an election is one way for us to see if our methods are working, if our samples are sound, if we are doing things scientifically. But there's a more important thing that I have to point out here on the second point, which this realization also came about last night during the networking session, is that The election surveys show that the respondents are sincere with their responses. There is no fear at all at telling the truth who they voted for or who they want to vote for. And that, for us, is a very important part in the practice of survey research. We have been doing this elections since 1992, election surveys, and we have done exit polls over the past, this one is just last year, and our track record has pegged our accuracy at average absolute difference of less than 1%. And this is for the vice president. So we are also quite accurate in terms of matching that of the official results. That's less than 1% average deviation. Senators, we all got 12 out of 12 winners in their correct ranking. So that's something that, shows that it proves 2 points. Our sampling works and the respondents are telling the truth. Now, all of this we thank not just because of the revival of democracy more than 30 years ago, but ultimately we are protected by the law in the freedom to conduct election surveys. In 1998, we had the Supreme Court of the Philippines ensuring that no ban will be imposed on any organization trying to do exit polls. And here, this is the Supreme Court ruling. Let me just point out, because this also supports what Florence mentioned about transparency. Exit polls can be vital tools in eliminating the evils of election fixing and fraud. Pre-election surveys and reporting the surveys, we are also protected by the Constitution. There's no ban. We won it in 2001. And here, just to give you an idea of how important the election results and for election results to be published, it gives ascendancy over the rest of the noise a voter will hear. The campaign jingles, candidates dancing over mass media, their own composition of songs, promoting their campaigns. Above all that, survey results is a credible source of information. Just to compare, around the world, 54% has no blackout periods. That's 45 of 83 countries as of 2012 in the World Association for Public Opinion Research. So this is freedom to publish election polls. 26 countries had no poll embargo at all. There's the Philippines, there's Germany, there's Malaysia, Indonesia, India, Japan, among others. What are the surveys showing? In other countries, this is not ours. This is from a study by Dr. Wolfgang Donsbach in 2001. The effects of election poll remain minimal and harmless, and usually their influence over average citizen is overestimated. But here in the Philippines, there is no empirical support to the fear that trending in election survey results is caused by surveys. So we are being accused of bandwagoning, but like I said, to answer that directly, election surveys per se, minimal effect. But there are many other factors contributing to how people arrive at their decision. We had tactical voting, that's 56%. Conscience voting versus bandwagon. Are you being told by your leader who to vote for? That's 70 versus 30. Are you voting independently or, command voting, I'm sorry. That's 85 versus 15. Are you voting for the good of the society or you are just voting for your own self-interest? 86 versus 14. Do you think candidates win because of popularity or political machinery? 76 versus 24. Vote buying. Do you take the money but then follow your conscience in the end? 54%. It's sad, but that's how it happens. Are you voting because of the platform or because of the personality? That's 57 to 40. 46% decide on who to vote for 3 months before, and it's easier compared to last election, and 73% said debates helped in choosing a president. I will just skim through all this one, but except for this one, because this is the most, I think, telling. Directly election surveys, when you have encountered the surveys informing you of the election race, what happens to you? Do you vote for, do you think, would this most likely happen to you? And only 4% said, yes, I will vote for the one stronger in surveys. Another 3% said, I will vote for the one weaker in the surveys. While 5% said, I will do both, because candidate mixing is common in the Philippines. So all in all, minimal effect, they cancel out each other. And those who are aware but not affected, see? But here's the one what I said about indirect. It's their value they put on their votes. If most of the desired candidates has no hope of winning, then vote for one who might win in order not to waste one's vote. It's a majority, 56%. So yeah, these are just details showing you the bullets that I've shown earlier. I won't dwell so much on that, but I would like to go here because this is one of the unique surveys that we've had. It's a panel, online surveys using mobile phones. So here we are able to see the changes in a panel. And here, we saw how our current president benefited from the weekly changes for the weekly news. And I pointing out here that he's taking votes from other candidates, which is why when journalists ask us, we always remind them that see when was the survey done, because in the end, their favorite question was that, is this sure? Is this the winner? And just like what Florence said, polls are just snapshots. Voting decisions are not static, they change. Here I would just point out the debates and how they change over time in between debates. So, same with the vice presidential race. So let me end with that, and just to summarize, election surveys, minimal effect, directly, but indirectly, yes, but all for the purpose of information. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leo, for that presentation. It's interesting how you pointed out about mobile surveys and the use of technology creeping into the polling system. Earlier, we used to have, a bunch of volunteers going out into the field and, doing random surveys, maybe a group of 100 or maybe 1,000, depending on the size of the population and the sample size you wanted. Without much ado, I'm going to introduce Professor Werner J. Patzelt. After his A-level exams, he was active in the German military for 2 years. From 1974 to 1980, he studied political science, sociology, and history in Munich, Strasbourg, and Ann Arbor. He was a scholarship holder of the Studentenstiftung des, oh, my German's terrible, isn't it? Right. From 1980 to 1991, he was a scientific assistant at the Institute of Political Science at the University of Passau. In 1984, he achieved his PhD and finished his state doctorate in 1990. In 1991, Professor Patzelt, he has been a professor for political systems and system comparison at the Technical University of Dresden. He's also visiting faculty at the Middle East Technical University, at the École Pratique University in Paris, at the university in South Africa University in Stellenbosch. Lastly, but not the least, of course, he is a member of the Executive Committee of the International Political Science Association and the Commission of History and Parliament of Political Parties. Over to you, Professor Patzel.
Well, let me begin my comments on whether polls do influence elections with my favorite sociological theorem, which happens to be the only one which really is true. It's called after a Polish sociologist with the name of Thomas. It's called the Thomas Theorem, and it sounds as follows. If people define a situation as given, and if they act out of this definition of the situation, the consequences of their actions are real, independent on how real or irreal their definition of the situation has been. And this is true without any doubt, and this is true for polls and media coverage of polls ahead of election day. And the consequence is that there is nothing like only a description of horse races when polls are published. They have an impact on the definition of the situation. And therefore, they have an impact on how voters think about how they should decide. Having said this, let's look, so to speak, at the dependent variable of polls and being publicized. What can be influenced by polls? And what is presumably influenced based on what is known out from research? What is at least to a certain degree influenced by polls? Well, first of all, it's voters' perceptions of the chance of persons or parties to win or of coalitions to be formed after election day. That is, the dependent variable is the formation of expectations about the electoral outcome, which goes into the definition of the situation and therefore into voting behavior. And here there is clear evidence that there are some effects. I will talk about the degree of the effects later on. The second thing that can be influenced is the concrete vote for a candidate or for a party, whether this be done naively or strategically. And here again, research shows that there are some effects. The third thing which can be influenced is voting at all. Will I really cast my vote, or will I not do so because my favorite party, well, this time won't succeed? Well, it seems that polls do not alienate people from voting, but that polls are really not the central factor or are not among the central factors for the willingness to vote either. So there is some kind of indifference. There is a fourth effect, which is possibly not of less significance. It may be the case that polls stir interest for further political information beyond the knowledge about the state of the horse race, in particular about political positions of those who want to get my vote. On the other hand, polls can create the illusion of political knowledge and satisfaction with the things one knows about politicians running for office and parties running for power. And here the findings are quite unclear. How polls exert an influence, have an impact on political knowledge and on the willingness, on the inclination to look for further political information. Generally, there is no doubt that polls have a certain influence on voting behavior. We saw some data for the case of the Philippines. In Germany, between 1983 and 2013, no less than 25 to 17% of respondents said that their vote was influenced to a certain degree by polls. So there is a certain influence without any doubt, but the problem is that there is now no clear picture of what factor, in what degree, and under what circumstances really influences how votes are cast. And what is still widely unclear is the concrete causation chains that are at work. There is some effect, but how this effect really is worked out in practice, this is not quite well known. What we know is tendencies and or weak effects. And this is so because, first, there are overlapping effects. The bandwagon effect and the underdog effect might be at work in the very same election, cancelling their consequences out mutually. The lethargy effect, the guillotine or closeness effect might be overlapping. So there is no surprise that we are not able to measure really clear effects which can be found in every and all countries. Then there is a lot of intervening factors which make the effect of polls on behavior, on election behavior, quite different. There is the effect of timing. When are polls publicized? The closer to election day, the more widely polls will be perceived. And it depends on the perception of polls whether they can really influence voting behavior. Of course, there is the type of political system, the type of party system, the type of electoral system, which is of utmost importance for the fact whether polls can have an effect on voting behavior. For instance, coalition formation, a favorite topic in German polls. Coalition formation is not a big issue in presidential political systems. And horse races, information about horse races among top politicians are less important in PR systems compared with first past the post systems. So there is a large variety in the intervening factors which cause the effect that the picture that can be found in the literature is not so clear. Of course, third intervening variable, there is the degree of party identification in the country. And since party identification can change over time, the effect of polls can change over time equally. And of course, there is the fact of voting volatility. If you're in a political system like the East German one, with a lot of voting volatility, polls can have more effects than in a political system where there is significant stability of voting behavior, maybe even over generations. The next intervening factor is not so easily detected, but is of very great importance. That's the skills of information processing on part of the voters. There is reason to think, and there are some findings who show that there's a distinction, a difference between better and less informed citizens when they are confronted with polls, and it seems to be the case that polls have more impact on the less informed citizens than on those who are better informed and therefore are able to base their voting decision on a variety of different sources of information on what might be the rational choice. Of course, there are also learning effects on part of voters. Collectively, there is something like self-destroying or self-fulfilling predictions. The Liberal Party certainly will be below the 5% threshold, so my vote for the Liberals will be wasted, therefore I will give my vote to whomever. Well, if you have self-destroying predictions, then you have a very important intervening variable, and therefore no clear effects will become visible based only on correlations between polls and electoral turnout. And of utmost importance then is the narrative in which poll data are embedded. The very same figures can tell different stories depending on the angle from which you look at them. And since polls and the result of polls come not merely as figures to the eyes of the audience, but mediated by the media, they are always embedded in narratives, and it's the narratives which seem to have the biggest importance on how polls turn out in electoral behavior. Of course, electoral campaigns and their outcomes are highly individual results of intertwined contingency and path dependency. Look, for instance, at the data that we have seen before on the Social Democrat electoral campaign in Germany, without their defeat at 2 state elections, the whole campaign for the federal elections would have been quite different. It's the effect of path dependency. And whether there are critical junctures in an electoral campaign depends on so many factors which cannot be controlled in advance. And because we have this phenomenon of historicity, which is the intersection of contingency and path dependency, there is no surprise at the fact that we have no clear picture out from comparative empirical research. And maybe we still have insufficient theories about how polls and electoral behavior interact. Maybe we have not yet the best possible analytical methods. And this might have to do a lot with the fact that most studies so far have been carried out with a look at the United States and their quite specific political system, such that theories and concepts do not travel so well to other political systems. So these are the reasons for which we have not really a clear picture about how polls and election behavior interact. But it is quite clear already now that polls shape campaigns, since polls provide information on voters' preferences, perceptions, and so on, which of course give shape to how electoral campaigns are shaped and conducted. Let me in a second and shorter section of my talk make some comments on the role of media. Because whatever effects polls may have, these effects are mediated by media coverage of the polls. And at least 4 effects here have to be briefly discussed. The first important media effect is caused by priming. What type of poll results have the best chances to be reported, that are in fact reported in the leading media? Is media coverage more on horse races, or is it more or to the same degree on positions? If positions are covered, is it more general positions of political parties or very special positions which are interesting due to sudden theme careers which may occur or not, which cannot be seen in advance? So priming of media is of utmost importance, and priming is very much out of control of those who are in charge of conducting electoral campaigns. The second media effect is framing, under which headlines are the figures stemming from the polls put. What are the narratives in which the figures, even absolutely correct figures, are embedded? This framing effect is so important because the cognitive maps, the political preferences of media people usually are skewed and biased in comparison with citizens' cognitive maps and preferences. In the case of Western democracies, many empirical studies among journalists have shown that they are much more with a preference at the left side of the political spectrum than at the right side. For instance, in Germany, some 70% of journalists prefer the Social Democrats or the Greens or the Left Party, such that what is quite normal and without any bias for a left-leaning journalist might not be at all objective and unbiased for the broader audience. So this framing, which is due to the general political outlook of journalists, is of utmost importance for how polls results are presented to the public. Third, there is possible simplification and misrepresentation of the, so to speak, true state of complex political opinion, which goes into the electoral decisions of the voters. Simplification, not only for didactic and pedagogical reasons, but because of limited space or limited time in the media. You have to convey your message in brief time, so you have to simplify what might be at the basis of voting decisions that you measure with questions like, what party would you vote for if next Sunday would be election day? And the fourth factor is the degree of unanimity or diversity among journalists. what will be the consequence if most of them will do biased framing, thereby distorting what the very same data might mean if embedded into a different narrative, but one which is not given in the leading media, because journalists have a biased and collectively biased mindset. So, what will happen with the media and the credibility of journalists if this distorted narrative will be corrected by election results? Sometimes we have election results which come as a surprise for all our pollsters. And then the question is, what was wrong? Was it our instruments? Was it our narratives? Was it the interaction of the figures with our narratives, with the public? So that's a very tricky game. Let me make a few remarks on normative concerns. It's quite clear that only informed people can contribute to that potential of rationality which is made accessible exactly by pluralist public discourse and by inter-party conflicts, where voters act as judges on performance or judges on substance. So the better people are informed, the better pluralist democracy will work. And therefore, we have to provide sufficient information. One task has to be carried out by a public educational system. Schools, on whatever level, have to provide citizens with adequate mental maps, with adequate mindsets that allow to digest political information which is fed in, dependent on the constant flux of political events, among which elections and electoral campaigns are an important part. Ahead of election day, information about the distribution of preferences for candidates and parties is relevant, and it needs to be fed into, hopefully, reliable and sound mental maps, such that sense can be made out of these many figures which come to knowledge during a well-covered electoral campaign. And finally, media, and these interactions between survey institutions and what is written in the newspapers, media have to assist personal opinion formation, but they have not to dominate it or even to distort it. And therefore, priming and framing by journalists, which is necessary. You have to make decisions on priming and framing, but priming and framing have to be done in a non-partisan way. Let me end with some practical conclusions. First of all, there is absolutely nothing wrong with publicizing polls ahead of elections. Banning reporting about polls, if feasible at all, and the French made a funny experience with banning poll reporting or exit polls reporting in France, but having fed in the numbers from media from Belgium. So even if it would be possible to ban reporting about polls, this would only lead to knowledge advantages, to superior knowledge on part of political parties, on part of campaigners, and those advantages have questionable legitimacy, because the boss in a democracy needs to be the citizen, the people, the well-educated citizen, hopefully, and not political leaders who have undisclosed knowledge. Second issue, because most polls are initiated and paid for by news media, and we saw the family relationship in the case of German poll institutions and German top media, because, to restart my sentence, because major news media initiate and pay for most polls, they have the responsibility not only to generate data on horse races and basic evaluations on part of citizens, but if they would do their job properly, they should take inspiration from how professional political scientists would design such service, allowing insights into the deeper layers of opinion formation which end up in voting decisions, and not only showing who is ahead in this horse race or not. And this cannot be over-exaggerated, because the public has every right to understand its own dynamics of opinion formation. Third, it is out of question that there must always be information when polls are covered by the media. There must always be information on sample size, on sample type, on sampling errors, on margins of statistical variation, and of course of the exact wording of the questions. And with these margins of statistical variation, with some problems, if a party goes down by 1 point or up by 1 point, so often you read in the newspapers, well, the chances of this party are declining or they're rising. It's simply in the margin of statistical variation and creates a wrong perception among the public and erroneous public discussions. Fourth, journalists should offer competing narratives of what the data seem to tell, such that any amalgamation of data and interpretation could be avoided, and that the reader, the listener, the educated citizens has incentives to build an own opinion on what the data might mean. Because usually data might tell different stories. And if journalists only focus on one story, well, that's not enough. If journalists focus on the story a given political party wants them to tell, that's even worse. So what is the use of pluralist democracy, of a pluralist universe of media, if you read the same narratives in all the media? You need pluralism even on this level. Next, journalists should never make politics themselves with polls, thereby assuming an advocate's position. Well, this is a normative claim far from reality. Most journalists, in particular in the European and German tradition, understand their role as being an advocate for progressive or whatever political camps. But actually, this is wrong. Journalists have to be servants to democracy, not masters of democratic political processes. Last of all, journalists should embed polls and what they write about polls and the results in analyses of those real issues which seem to be reflected by citizens in exactly that ways that are shown by the poll results. What's going on if a certain candidate is rising or going down? What are the topics which interact with the popularity or non-popularity of a political party? Exactly this should be at the core of media coverage of polls. So the central practical message of what I have been telling to you is quite simple. That polls influence voting is clear, but we do not yet know exactly how this is done and in what causation chains. That they influence voting is not clear, but is also fine. Media play an important role, and even this role is absolutely fine as long as journalists do their job honestly and correctly. And about some criteria for honest and correct dealing with poll results, I have spoken at the end of my comments. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Patzel. Before I open up the floor, could I have a show of hands from the audience? With the question being, how many in the audience take polls in their country seriously? Could you have a show of hands? Okay, 1, 2, 3, and 3.5, 4. Okay, that brings me to one question which I will take the liberty of asking, being the moderator, is polls and pollsters around the world are getting it wrong. Could I have the panel's views? What is the reason that polls are going so wrong in different continents, in different countries? And two big examples. One from our own experience back in India is the Modi campaign, the results of the polls. No one predicted a landslide victory. The same goes for the United States, the Trump victory. So Dr. Patzel, if we could start with you.
Well, there is one major factor for that, which we call the lying factor. Because citizens are inclined to give answers based not only on what they really think, but based on social and political desirability. I will give only two examples. And this might be only the tip of the iceberg of what's going on in other countries as well. In one of the German states, my native state of Bavaria, there has been, or there still is, a hegemonial party, a certain branch of the Christian Democratic Union. And there is a tiny social democratic party, which is under protection right now, such that it would not disappear. In Bavaria, it is quite fashionable to say, well, if next Sunday would be election day, I would vote for the Social Democratic Party. Simply to make clear, well, I do not belong to those who constantly vote for the Christian Social Union. I am progressive and critical. Therefore, pollsters found out that the answers they get in polls are biased in favor of the Social Democrats. And in the course of the electoral history, they found the necessary weights or parameters to correct what they found. The other example is about the AfD, the new right-wing populist party in Germany. It's absolutely impossible to say, well, I'm going to vote for the AfD, because then you're a racist, a right-wing extremist, whatever. So you won't say you're voting for the AfD. And this is why so many Germans were so much surprised when the AfD got 22% of the votes at East German state elections. Now we have learned about this lying factor and are able to correct it. So what is the sense of this lengthy story? As long as we do not know about lying factors, because there are new phenomena like the rise of Trump or the rise of a new political leader, as long as we do not know about the lying factors, it is quite clear that there is a certain risk that we will not be able to transform the raw data into correct fine data. And therefore, polls give wrong expectations for election day.
Leo, would you like to shed some light from the Philippines perspective on this issue? Are voters really lying in Philippines as well?
Well, lying is not something that, as we found in our exit polls, their answers are reflective of their true votes. Let me just share what happened in one case where exit poll was not as accurate as we've hoped for. This happened in 2004. The inaccuracy came about not because of sampling error, but non-sampling error. What I meant was, out of the 17 regions back then in the Philippines, we got the results wrong in 3 regions. And that made a big news because it was a very close fight. But we found there was an independent body formed to review the process that we did. And it was found that there were no irregularities that happened with the way we did our surveys. The sampling was sound, the methodology was scientific. But it was found out that it was the non-response that caused the inaccuracy. Non-response that's not entirely brought about by fear of telling the answer or lying about who they voted for, but non-response because of non-availability. During that, at that time, the weather was bad in those areas. And our methodology back then was not as what true exit poll is all about, meaning we interview people as they go out of the voting precinct. Back then, it was done household-based. So our field interviewers were waiting at their homes, at the voters' homes. But since there was rain at that time, they stayed somewhere else. The voters stayed in malls, in shopping centers, instead of going home. That's why there was a big chunk of the sample that were considered non-response, and that led to the inaccuracy of our exit poll. So it's a non-sampling error.
May I add one sentence?
Yes, absolutely.
You were discussing exit polls. I was discussing the normal polls ahead of election day. Exit polls in Germany usually are quite accurate. Polls ahead of election might be wrong.
Yeah. Do you want to say something to that? Oh, okay. Yeah, Professor Patzel already pointed out the German point of view and the German experience. Actually, he was talking about the lying factor, or the shy effect, that people don't actually, they actually lie to us when we talk on, when we ask them, when we interview them, and we are currently experiencing that regarding the right populist, the AfD, but we're learning. This party is quite new, and we're learning, so we put that into our consideration, and I think that was regarding the polls and the German experience. But there might be also other explanations, and then we're back to our topic when we think about, for example, the referendum in Colombia about the peace treaty, or when we think about the Brexit, the decision there. The polls said that there would be a majority for against the Brexit, and there would be a majority for the peace treaty in Colombia. So earlier I was talking about the lethargy effect, and I said that when people learn about the polls and they see, well, the decision is made already, we're going to stay in the European Union, we're going to vote for the peace treaty, then some people, and as we learned later, in Great Britain, especially young people, said, well, then it's not so important that I vote and I stay home. That can also be one of the one of the explanation between the gap between polls and the actual result. Regarding the exit polls, Professor Patzel also pointed it out. There we're quite confident and quite happy with the way we do things and with the results. Actually, if we compare our exit polls with the final result, usually we have a difference, an accumulated differences between the exit poll and the final result of 1 point something %. So that's like really, really good, and so nothing to be afraid of there.
I would like to go, sorry.
Sure.
I would like to go back to the pre-election scenario, for example, in the Philippines. Same, when it comes to the lying factor, it's not something that we have empirical data to find out or even analyze. But the only variable that we would have would be vote commitment. It's like, when have you decided to vote for the one you chose? And as we found that a majority of around 70% would already have their minds made up 3 months before, and that's where the remaining 30% would have to be that sample that strategists would be scrambling to get on their side, because we're talking about at least 5 choices of candidates, for example, for the national positions. So yeah, so vote commitment, usually a majority, 3 months ahead.
I'm going to open up the floor for questions. So please raise your hands if anyone has questions. Okay, can we get a mic there?
Yes, thank you very much. I just wanted to comment or to ask a further question concerning the criticism of the media, which I think, at least in the German case, is rightfully done so, that a lot of the media they have wrong concepts, or they are biased when it comes to handling the polls. I just wanted to hear from Dr. Meyer whether there has been also more of the soul-searching amongst polling institutions that you indicated already, because there has been criticism in the media when it comes to predicting, for example, the Brexit vote or the Trump victory, that the very same way like journalists talk to the wrong people, polling institutes also talk to the wrong people.
Mario, do you want to ask your question as well?
I would go in a different direction, so I don't know if you want to answer that first, or I mean, the question or the panel is about, do polls influence elections? And we were basically talking about how public opinion is shaped by polls. But coming from, let's say, more campaign background, I have to say the biggest impact I can see of polling is within campaign organizations. Because what's happening is it's basically they are taken very seriously, even though, I mean, we all know we are far ahead of the election, and then know there's still a lot of things to cover along the way, but still when you are, let's say, like 8 months out to the election day, and you have a certain kind of polling, you adjust your planning to that. And this, I mean, you could see in the German context, I mean, Florence showed it with the Social Democrats. I mean, you could have seen what Schulz was saying at the time when he was searching in the polls, how confident he basically brought his policy agenda forward, and then how he reacted when he went down in the polls. So, I mean, you could see how the campaign organization adapted to that, and I would say this is shaping significantly the dialogue during an election discourse. And another example in the US, I mean, and sometimes we try to explain the outcome of the American election ex post, you know, but basically if you take together 100,000 votes in 5 battleground states, we would talk about a complete different election outcome. And basically what the Trump campaign did, and I interviewed some of these people there, they basically bet on a certain strategy because they saw that no other way would have worked to win this election. And on the other, in the other camp, and I talked to some Clinton people, they were so full of themselves and they were so certain that they're gonna win that they spent time in states they didn't need, but ultimately made them losing the election. So what I just wanted to point out, or maybe got your comment on that, it's not so much about how journalists approach them, and there I would have a lot of criticism, I share with you all of them, but how much it is shaping the political discourse within campaign organization, and how much they are either aggressive or less aggressive in approaching their strategy.
All right. Leo, do you want to start off with the first question and answer that?
I was more focused on the second question.
Okay. So Florence, why don't we go with you first?
Yes. Yeah, well, we are regarding the criticism, we are in fact in constant dialogue with our media partner, and we are in fact we do constant soul searching, as you said, and in this constant dialogue with our media partner, not just with our media partner, with all the journalists we talk to, we repeat and repeat and repeat what I already said here, is that journalists have to make sure that when they publish polls 2 weeks or 4 weeks before the election, that they make sure this is not a prediction. But many journalists simply don't get that. Sometimes it's even in the headline. It's in the new prediction. The CDU is going to win. And if people read that and then it's shared all over the internet and it has a far reach and everybody sees that, then it's wrong from the beginning. So this is what we do, and we also do seminars for journalists, and we actually teach them and invite them into our institute and have seminars on how to read numbers and how to write about them, and again, to make sure that this is a snapshot. And to, for example, always repeat the fact that 30% or 1/3 of all the people who vote make the decision in the last days or actually on election day. So when we publish something 2 weeks before the election day, maybe half, maybe 40% have not made up their mind yet. So you cannot predict anything if 30, 40, 50% of the people just don't know yet who they're going to vote for. Another thing, we were talking about the shy factor earlier, or the lying factor. When we ask the people about their vote intention, 90%, sometimes 90, 80, 90% of the people answer. But we both know that not 90% of the people actually participate in the election. So some of the people who say something, who say they have a vote intention, end up not actually participating in the election. And regarding the soul searching, regarding our methods and techniques, of course, that's a constant issue, and you said maybe we asked the wrong people. Let me tell you, we try to ask everybody. We try to have an actual random sample so that everybody in Germany who is allowed to vote has actually the same chance to participate in our surveys. So we randomly pick phone numbers, we randomly pick people in the household, so not the first one who answers is interviewed, but you'll be asked who is the one who has birthday, the next birthday, and then so there's a two-step random sample, but again, we need 5 successful phone calls, or need 5 people to pick up the phone in order to have one complete interview. So there are many people who just say, no, I don't participate. And the question is, who are these people maybe? Yeah? If they have a certain political attitude, and we don't know that. We cannot reach them. Those are the challenges, but I can assure you we are in constant soul searching. We do telephone interviews, we do face-to-face interviews, we do online interviews, we compare all those methods, we mix them sometimes, always to be to deliver the best state of the art.
We have time for one more question, and then I'll hand it back to our panelists. Does anyone have a question?
Sorry. Yeah.
Can we take the question and then we come back? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll just
I thought you were asking
answer
question. Yeah.
the one about where the real action is and where the real influence comes from. Yes, we agree.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
The poll results, are they also influenced by the organization, for example, based on the funding the organization gets? I mean, are there vested interests inherent in the poll results? You know, how non-partisan are the results, basically?
No. The answer is no. The results are not dictated by whoever formulated the question or who funded the question. Yes, as I was referring to the question about where the real influence happens, yes, these are the campaign strategists. They are the ones driving the kinds of questions, the kinds of research questions that will be included in these pre-election surveys. We've seen candidates fail because they did not listen to their strategists. Like, for example, some candidates would insist on a certain topic or a certain issue or advocacy, like women. But if they look at the survey results, for example, he or she was more identified to education, for example, but we've seen how they fail because they did not listen. So all the questions, all the kinds of data being generated by pre-election surveys or election surveys are driven by research coming from the inputs of the strategists or the political think tanks, usually are from the political candidates themselves.
Professor Patzel, I'll let you have the last word on it.
I think that Mario's comment was absolutely well taken. We did not speak enough about how polls and campaign machineries interact. I remember a wonderful talk given some 15, 80 years ago by somebody responsible for the campaign of an American presidential candidate, showing us diagrams and graphs and statistics of whatever kind devoted to the following issues. At the very beginning, polls were taken about the strengths and the weaknesses of the opponent and the own horse on the race. Then he explained to the audience what measures were taken for negative campaigning, for affirmative campaigning, and how during the electoral campaign it was measured whether the campaign ended in the results which were desired. That is, in creating more weaknesses in public perception of the competing candidate and seeing more strength in the own candidate. And exactly, this is one of the instrumental effects of polls for elections and how they really contribute to election results. And we should have been, I really accept this criticism, much more explicit on this this issue. This seems to be some kind of how to put it, professional, a too narrow professional outlook, because all of us deal with polls and public opinion, but you, coming from the practical side of the game, put your finger into the wound that we left with our too narrow discussions of the topic. Thank you so much for your comment.
We're absolutely out of time, so I'm going to wrap this up. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. I think probably next time we should have a politician as well on the panel, you know, along with the pollsters and the organizations.